Today's lesson is going to be on advanced understandings of the major scale. The major scale or Ionian scale is one of the most commonly used musical scales, especially in Western music, and is a foundation of a lot of the theoretical understandings. We're going to be exploring harmony. Harmony is understanding the combinations of simultaneously sounded musical notes to produce chords or chord progressions. We're also going to talk about what the word key means and how that functions. The basic understanding of key is that the key of a piece of music is a group of pitches or sounds or a scale upon which the composition is created, kind of like a guide of which notes you can use. And we're going to get deeper into this and how it relates to the major scale. So sit back and relax, and here we go. So we're going to start off using the C major scale, which is these notes here laid out. You may also have seen this written out using what's called the solfege system. And the solfege system goes like this: Do, Re, Mi, Fa, So, La, Ti, Do. And this is the exact same thing, just a different system popularized, for vocals as a way of understanding or giving name to these specific vibrations that you're trying to create. So this, as you can see, is a scale from one octave to the next, and this in particular is the major scale, which we call the C major scale. Down here I'm writing out these numbers. The series of numbers actually relates to what we call the scale degree. And an easy way of thinking about it is it's the first, second, third, or fourth note in the order of the scale as it ascends. C is the first note, D is the second note, etc. So why is that important? Well, it's important to look at scales in different ways, especially when we're talking about harmonies, and harmonies specifically how they relate to are designed for chords. Now, if you play an instrument that doesn't use chords, you'll still need to know chordal harmony relationships. And the most obvious one that we start with is major. We also have minor. So you may have heard of these, major and minor. Another common one is dominant. Sometimes this is called a 7. You might hear dominant 7 or just 7, like a 7 chord. C7, G7, like that. But beyond that, there are other ones. Major 7 is an example. Another example is minor 7. And these are not the only ones, they continue. But each one of these has a combination of notes required in order to produce it. An analogy that I like to use is cooking. So imagine that you wanted to make your favorite dish, my favorite dish being pizza. So if I wanted to make pizza, I would need some specific ingredients. For example, I would need bread or crust, I would need sauce, I would need cheese, and I would need my toppings. And then when I combine all of those things together, I get what is called pizza. So that means that when I want to make a major chord, I need specific ingredients. And those ingredients are 1, 3, and 5. What I mean by that is that the first note, the third note, and the fifth note of that given major scale. If I want to make a minor chord, I need a 1, a flat 3, and a 5. If I want to make a dominant chord, I need a 1, a 3, a 5, and a flat 7. If I want to make a major 7 chord, I need a 1, a 3, a 5, and a 7. If I want to make a minor 7 chord, I need a 1, a flat 3, a 5, and a flat 7. So what does that mean exactly? Well, what it means is if I wanted to make a C major chord, I would need the notes from the corresponding C major scale. The 1, the 3, and the 5, or in this case, C, E, and G, as can be seen written out. A minor chord would then need a C and an E flat, meaning a flattened 3 and a G. A dominant chord, or a C7 chord, would need a 1, a 3, a 5, and a flat 7. So 1, 3, 5, C, E, G that we already know from our major chord, with the addition of a flat 7, which is a B flat. A major 7 chord, or a C major 7 chord, sometimes drawn with this little triangle, would need 1, 3, and 5, and also the additional 7. If we look up to the blue scale degree, we can easily correspond that to the letters above in yellow, C, E, G, and B. Now, if we want a C minor 7 chord, sometimes written with C, and a little M7, we would need 1, flat 3 or E flat, G, and then flat 7 or B flat. And this is a way in which we can create harmonies and relate them back to the major scale of the given tonic or root note. But it can go even further. And I'm going to show you how you can utilize the major scale now to understand chord progressions and key signatures as well, and how to move between. So I'm going to do this by explaining how we can relate the given major scale to its diatonic triads. That's just like a fancy way of saying the 1 chord, the 2 chord, the 3 chord. To make sure that we don't confuse this with scale degree, I'm going to write it in a different color, and I'm going to use Roman numerals, even though it is the same numbers and also in the same order. And here I'll spell out what each harmony associated is. Now, once you memorize this pattern, you can relate this to any major scale and understand chord progressions using any key related to that major scale. So in this case, we're using the C major scale, so we're playing chords in the key of C, or the key of C major. So diatonic triads above, here in green, Roman numerals, and below are our harmonies. The harmonies go C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G7 or G dominant, A minor, and B diminished. The little circle that looks like a degree symbol is the symbol for diminished. That's another type of harmony, which we'll get into in another video. Now, understanding major, minor, you can utilize the formulas that I showed you before to create any of the given chords that you may need, utilizing that individual chord's major scale. It's a little confusing the way I said it, but basically, if you take a major scale and you want to create a chord progression out of it, using a key, you can do it just like this. So 1, 4, 5, a 1, 4, 5 progression, which is very common in blues and rock and roll music, would easily be understood as C major, F major, and G major or G7. Now the reason that G major and G7 are sometimes substituted is that a 7 chord already has a major chord inside of it, so you can easily swap in between. Another common progression you may run into is a 1, 6, 4, 5 progression. This is commonly utilized in 1950s doo-wop and most associated with that, but it appears in songs from all types of time periods. That would require C major, A minor, F major, or G7 or G major. Now, I'm going to show you how this can work with every or any single scale that you want. I'll give you another example here by using the G major scale. So before we did it with the C major scale, now we're going to do it with the G major scale. You may take note that the G major scale has an F sharp as its 7, which means that it does contain 1 sharp. And when you see it on staff notation, you'll see it written out with 1 sharp. So the G major scale, here is written out the diatonic chords underneath with the Roman numeral system in green, and I've written my scale degree out with purple numerals above it. Under that, I'm going to write out the harmonies very quickly so you can remember how they go in what order. Same order like I showed you before: major, minor, minor, major, dominant, minor, diminished. So that means if I want to create a G major chord or a G minor chord or a G dominant or a 7 chord, I can utilize the same system. G major 7, that's the little triangle that I showed you before. Some people also write it with a big M. G little m7, minor 7 chord. Utilizing the same formula and theory from before, we can spell out all of our chords and harmonies as such. So since we're building all of our chords from a G using a G major scale, the G major chord will be G, B, D, 1, 3, 5. The G minor chord will be G, B flat, as in flat 3. G7 or G dominant, G, B, D, F. Now here you see that F natural has actually a flattened 7 because the normal 7 is F sharp. So you got to keep in mind that those types of things will trip you up a little bit, but as long as you know the accidentals that relate to each major scale that you're building your chords out of, you should always be able to build your chords utilizing this method. So now if we move into chords in a given key, since we're playing in the key of G, our 1-4-5 progression is going to be G, C, and D, or G major chord, C major chord, D major chord, or D7. Remembering that D7 utilizes the same notes as the major chord. You can see that below, 1, 3, 5, and then also 7. If we wanted to play a 1-6-4-5 progression, or that classic doo-wop kind of progression, we would use G, E minor, C, D, or D7. This method can be utilized to create chord progressions and movements in any given key, and also can help you to build chords from any relative tonic using its major scale as well. So if you want to build D chords, you use the D major scale. If you want to build E chords, you use the E major scale, and so on and so forth. I hope this lesson was helpful, and I'll see you next time.